Okay, well, let's get started. Um, so there's a beautiful custom at this time of year during the Omer to learn Pirkei Avot. And it turns out that there are 6 weeks between Pesach and Shavuot, like 7 overall, but minus the days of Pesach. 6 weeks and 6 chapters of Pirkei Avot. And so the custom is to learn one chapter per week over the course of that 6 weeks. That works out well. 6 weeks, 6 chapters. But where did this custom come from? One idea that's been offered is that it's based on the first words of Pirkei Avot, right? The first words of Masechet Avot, which is Moshe kibel Torah mi Sinai. Moshe received the Torah at Sinai, and that's a good phrase for this time of year as we lead up and prepare ourselves to receive the Torah on Shavuot. That's one beautiful reason given. But I think an even more beautiful reason that I heard for this custom is based on the concept of derech eretz kadma Torah, that proper behavior or proper ethical behavior comes before even the Torah itself. So as we prepare in the weeks leading up to Matan Torah, we have to first ground ourselves in the ethical wisdom of Pirkei Avot in derech eretz, which is kadma Torah. Okay, another thought. Anyways, I'm excited to go through this kind of called it the reintroduction to Pirkei Avot. I grew up with my grandfather quoting from Pirkei Avot very often. Kind of grew up with these sayings in my ears, and so my hope is that maybe this year will inspire a few people to take on the custom of studying Pirkei Avot during this time of year. Okay, we've got a lot to do tonight. We're going to look at Pirkei Avot with a fresh set of eyes from a slightly different perspective than you might have in the past. In English, Pirkei Avot is typically called the ethics of our fathers. And of course, I've referred already to this idea of it being a book of ethics to some extent. But tonight we'll see that Pirkei Avot is much more than a book of ethical maxims or just of ethical wisdom. Of course, Pirkei Avot has all of that in it, but to call it ethics of our fathers, I would say sells the tractate, sells the Masechet short. So let's start by thinking about how Pirkei Avot fits into the Mishnah as a whole. Because remember, Pirkei Avot is a Masechet, right? It's Masechet Avot. Just like Brachot, Masechet, right? The laws of blessings, or Sukkah, about the laws of Sukkot, or Kiddushin, about the laws of marriage, etc. The Darim, about the laws of oaths, right? Each Masechet has its own topic. But this, Masechet Avot, is a very unusual Masechet in that there's no halachic material in it. So it is a Masechet of the Mishnah, but it's a very unusual one. And so, let's ask, what is it doing there in the first place? And a preview of where we're headed to tonight, we'll see the Masechet Avot, Pirkei Avot, has an important role to play within the Mishnah as a whole, beyond just teaching us all of its great ethical maxims. We'll see that Pirkei Avot functions to some extent almost like an introduction to the Mishnah as a whole. Because keep in mind, the Mishnah does not have an introduction, right? There's no note at the beginning of the Mishnah from Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi saying who he is and when he lived and why the Mishnah was written down. That doesn't exist. The first Mishnah, beginning of Brachot, starts as if we're already mid-conversation. It just starts. Me'ematai karim et hashma et shema ba'arvit. From when may one begin saying Shema in the evening service? The Mishnah just kind of gets going with no introduction. You're already meant to know what's going on. And you have to wait until about halfway through the Mishnah. Tucked away at the end of Seder Nezikim is where we put it. And we find this very interesting tractate of Avot. And the title of the tractate, Avot, literally means fathers. So you might say the Masechet Avot gives us a profile of the fathers of our tradition as it's been passed down to us, right? Masechet Avot basically tells us the story of where rabbinic Judaism, basically the Judaism that has been passed down to us by Chazal over the generations, where that all comes from. And so in that sense, Masechet Avot lays the background for the Mishnah as a whole. So the plan for tonight is to kind of run through at least the early parts of Pirkei Avot with this fresh set of eyes, again, maybe a little differently than you may have looked at it before. So, okay, let's start at the beginning. We're gonna run through a bunch together. Okay, So we start at the beginning. Hopefully everyone can see that. Thumbs up. Yeah, okay. So we start. Moshe kibel Torah Sinai. Then Moshe received the Torah, teaching, or not Torah. We usually say it, but anyways, Moshe received Torah at Sinai. Umesaral Yoshua, and he passed it, he transmitted it to Yoshua. The Yoshua is a Canaan. Yoshua to the elders, and the elders to the prophets, and the prophets, Masruha, passed it on to the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. Okay, that's how this starts. And I should note, among the many beautiful sources that you could go to learn more about Masechet Avot, turns out that Rabbi Meir Soloveitchik has a very beautiful series that I think you can get in podcast. And he breaks down as he goes through Avot. And he also argues that it's a much deeper book than you might have thought. So I'd highly recommend that. But anyways, when he discusses this first Mishnah, he notes the difference between the words kibel and mesara, received and passed along. And kibel perhaps connotes a more direct flow of information. So Moshe kibel the Torah from Hashem, Har Sinai, right? He received clearly. And then umesara Yoshua, he passed it along to Yoshua as best as possible. And so that transmission is a new stage. It's a slightly different kind of transmission than the kind of transmission Moshe would have received himself. He passes it along, and now you have the second stage of Yoshua and the Zekanim and the Nevi'im, and then they in turn, again, Nisara le'anshe Knesset Hagdolah. They pass it along to the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. Again, they're passing it along, but it is kind of a different stage. And it almost kind of breaks down the passing of the tradition from Sinai until the days of the Mishnah into three different time frames. The first is Moshe actually, kind of at Har Sinai. Okay, that's kind of one. Stage two is that whole passing down of the Masorah in the middle, kind of in the period of prophecy, you could say, right? Starting in Yehoshua and leading through the prophets. And then you have a third period of the post-prophetic period for the most part. Certainly, by the time we get to the later stages, this is a post-prophetic period, but still there's a passing down of the generation of the tradition. Okay, so those are three stages. So that's kind of like the very, very basic starts with. And then suddenly, after that kind of big picture intro, then we get to the next Mishnah, the second and third Mishnah of Pirkei Avot, and suddenly it starts Shimon HaTzadik Haya Misharei Knesset Hagdolah. So of this category of people who pass down the tradition, the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, the men of the Great Assembly, it's almost like the fuzzy picture of those folks starts to zoom in and zoom in and zoom in until we have an actual person, the first person who's been named since Moshe and Yoshua in this story, right? So now we have a member of Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, one of the last ones, and his name is Shimon HaTzadik. Okay, so who is this first person who comes back into focus? So from other places in the Talmud, we know a little bit about him. It seems that he lived at around the time that the Greeks swept in to the Holy Land and took over after Alexander the Great conquers the Persian Empire, right? And in fact, there's even a story in Masechet Yoma about Shimon HaTzadik meeting Alexander the Great himself. Okay, so it gives us at least some sense of time period of when, again, we kind of zoom into the ending period of Anshe Knesset Hagdolah and entering the period of the Tanaim, right, the people who will be named in the Mishnah. That transition happens at around the time that the Greeks conquer the Persians and take over the Middle East, including Eretz Yisrael. Basically, the period of the Tanaim, the rabbis of the Mishnah, who will be named in the Mishnah, starts at about the time of the beginning of the Greek period in Eretz Yisrael. And interestingly, the next Mishnah begins Antignos ish Socho kibel Shimon HaTzadik, right? That we meet another person, kind of the next recipient of the tradition, and he is, interestingly, a Jewish man with a Greek name, Antignos ish Socho. And this So again, kind of pointing out the transition period from Anshe Knesset Agdolah to the period of the Tanaim is in this Greek period. Now, this may be a coincidence, but it may not be. And one way to think about that is that the Greeks were different than other empires that the Jews had had to deal with in their past, because previous empires that conquered the land of Israel usually did the same thing. They would come in and when they won, they would exile the people off the land. That's what the Assyrians did to the northern kingdom of Israel, and that's what the Babylonians did to the southern kingdom of Yehudah. But the Greeks had a very different strategy. They didn't kick the people off their land. Instead, what the Greeks did was they tried to integrate their subject peoples into the greater Greek world through culture, through the spread of what we call Hellenism. The idea wasn't to conquer and to vanquish. The idea was to conquer and then acculturate and absorb other people or other peoples. And so against the backdrop of this new kind of threat, not the threat of conquest and exile, but instead the threat of us mixing in and disappearing, it's interesting that we start to hear from these first rabbis of the Mishnah, the first named rabbis of the Mishnah. And Pirkei Avot is going to give us some images that gives us a sense of who these people were and what they were about. And when you look at the line statement attributed to Antignos Ish Sopho, right? Here's what he says. He says, Al tiyu chavadim hameshamshin et harav on the not lekabel pras. Don't be like servants who serve their master in order to receive reward. Ella, rather, havu chavadim hameshamshin et harav shelo amanat lekabel pras. Rather, you should be like servants who serve their master without an expectation of receiving reward via more shamayim aleichem. The fear of heaven should be upon you. Essentially, Antignos, Ish Socho, this Jewish man with a Greek name, is explaining a deep concept that we Jews understand, but which might have been more difficult for the Greeks to understand. And that idea is the idea of commandments, right? The concept of mitzvot. Mitzvot are fundamentally not there to serve you. They're commandments from a higher power. They come from above, from something that's beyond you, and they make demands of you. And the whole concept of a mission, of being commanded by this kind of single almighty source, beyond your power, beyond your personal interests, that's a very Jewish concept and not necessarily a Hellenistic concept, right? Because Greek culture, like perhaps our predominant culture in the West today, is much more focused on serving your wants and needs. You worship the gods so that they will do good for you, right? Maybe today you are kind to others so that they will return the favor to you. But Antignos says to us, no, that's not it. Do not follow the law for your own benefit. Rather, be like a servant who serves the master without expectation of receiving reward, with this certain sense of reverence of heaven above you, Moresh Shemayim Aleph. We Jews, as we know, have this uncompromising idea of commandments, right? Like as the hot dog ad tells us, right? We answer to a higher authority. Okay, but this is a particularly Jewish concept in the beginning of the Greek period. Okay, so let's take a short pause to recap. What we've seen so far is that the first Mishnah of Avot began by pointing out that the tradition is ancient, goes all the way back to Moshe at Har Sinai. But the first Mishnah also points out that we are many generations removed from Har Sinai, and the period of the prophets has ended. That stage has ended. At this point, we don't receive new material from above anymore. Rather, it's become our job to pass along the Masorah, this ancient tradition, from generation to generation. Okay, and we saw that the second and third Mishnah of Pirkei Avot point out that at some point around the time that the Greeks arrived, Jews experienced a spiritual earthquake that coincides with the end of the period of Anshe Knesset Hagdolah and the beginning of the period of the Tanaim. Okay, now suddenly we know the names of the rabbis of the tradition. We have statements attributable to each one of them in particular. These are the Avot, the forefathers, you could say, of rabbinic Judaism, basically of Judaism, as it continues. So, okay, onward. the next block of Mishnayot, this is just kind of continuing on. Okay, we enter a whole series of Mishnayot, one after another, that are about what we call the Zugot, the pairs. Okay, and so what we're going to see is, statements of Yossi ben Yoezer, Ish Tzreda, Yossi ben Yochanan, Ish Yerushalayim, Kiblu Mehem. So it names two people who were the next stage of the recipients of the tradition. And we have statements from each of them. Then it says Yoshua ben Prachya, these two were the next two people to receive the tradition. And we get statements from each of them. And then Yehuda ben Tivai v'Shimon ben Shetach, etc., etc. Pairs and pairs and pairs until we get to Hillel and Shammai. Okay, so we have the series of Zugot, the series of pairs. Interesting. The first couple named members of, that follow on Sheikh Knesset Hagdolah were not pairs, right? We had first Shimon HaTzadik and then Antigna Ish Sofo. But now this list is, again, two at a time, two leaders. Why not one? What's going on with that? Interestingly, there is a Mishnah in Chagiga, in the second chapter, that goes like this. Totally different context, but amazingly connected. It says, it's talking about a certain very particular, area of law that doesn't honestly matter for this purpose of noticing that. Yossi ben Yoezer omer shelo lismach. Yossi ben Yoezer says, you don't lay your hands on the head of the sacrifice itself. Yossi ben Yochanan omer lismach. But his co-leader of the generation takes the opposite view. And then Yoshua ben Prachya says, no. Nitai Harabeli, again, his pair says yes. And then the next generation would have been Tibai, says no. Shimon ben Shetach says yes. So just to point out, these are the exact same names. It's these two disagree, and then these two disagree, and then these two disagree, and one after another, all the way down to Hillel and Shammai. Actually, interestingly, it says Hillel u'Menachem lo nechlaku. Hillel and Menachem, who we know less about, let's say, they did not disagree. Yatsa Menachem, but Menachem left. And Nichnas Shammai. And Shammai entered, and then Shammai took the opposing view from Hillel. Okay, so this is very interesting. Over and over, these members of the exact same pairs mentioned in the Zugot Mishnayot of Pirkei Avot disagree with each other over and over. And the question in Chagiga is not resolved. Okay, so these are, what's the point? These are the Avot of the Masorah. They are passing down the tradition. But over time, particularly in turbulent times, we will increasingly see disagreement and variation emerge. Okay, at first, this growing range of opinions may not be a problem. Okay, but the stakes increase as we get to the next section of Pirkei Avot, because sorry, I should go back, because we all know that the last of the Zugot are Hillel and Shammai. And what happens after Hillel and Shammai is that things do change. As we know, the followers of Hillel and Shammai will morph into Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, not two leaders of a generation who may disagree, but leading a generation together, rather two rival groups, two rival schools of thought and practice. So of course, the Zugot, the pairs, had differences among them, but now these differences begin to calcify into factionalism, to divisiveness, and that's a different thing. Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, and the Gemara elsewhere in Sanhedrin will reflect on this with the line saying as follows, quote, from the time that the disciples of Shammai and Hillel grew in number, they were disciples who did not attend to their masters to the requisite degree. The students didn't pay attention to class enough, and weren't clear enough about what teachers had taught. And then the Gemara's interpretation, what happened is it says, dispute proliferated among the Jewish people, and the Torah became like two Torahs. Okay, so this is a way of saying that when you went from Hillel and Shammai disagreeing to Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai, you had a separation. It was just too much. The Torah became as if it was two Torahs, and that's a big challenge because in this post prophetic world, where we have leaders passing on the tradition but not receiving kind of answers from above, as we've seen, they won't necessarily agree, and we're bound to have variation of opinion, right, and disagreement. We're bound to have machloket, but at some point, it seems the story of Avot is telling us it's possible for things to go too far. At some point, disagreement goes from a feature of the Masorah to a problem for the Masorah. Okay, so what to do next? What to do when you get to the point that the disagreements that had gone on for generations and generations, which was fine through the period of the Zugot, become just too much. Okay, so then we get to the next section of Pirkei Avot, just the next set of Mishnayot. Okay, and that is we go through a series of Mishnayot that tell us about one potential solution of what to do when the level of machloket is starting to get too extreme. Okay, and let's just call this the dynasty Hillel. This is the next series of Mishnayot. So I'll zoom in a little. It's sensitive. We're not going to go through every line, but it's now suddenly we're introduced to Rabban Gamliel, who used to say, "Harav, min hasafek, ve'al tarbeh." So Rabban Gamliel is named. Interestingly, it does not say that he received, so it's kind of like a oddly kind of inserted in the. We are expecting it to say Rabban Gamliel Kibel Mehem. But anyways, Rabban Gamliel, with this new title of Rabban, who nobody has had to date, our Rabbi Gamliel, right? So we have him. This is what we might call Gamliel the first, Gamliel elder, Gamliel Hazaken. And then next is Shimon Beno, his son Shimon, and then Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, okay? And then Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and then after that, Rabban Gamliel Beno, Rabban Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, okay? This gets a little bit confusing because it's the same names over and over, but basically the line of Hillel, Gamliel the first, Shimon, and there's a Gamliel the second, his son is named Shimon, then Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and then another son named Gamliel. They're all named in a row, okay? And interestingly, this first line of Gamliel Hazaken includes the statement, "Histalek min hasafek." Separate yourself, avoid doubt. Okay. What winds up happening with this series of generations, different than before, is that the line of Hillel turns out to be not just a line of scholars, but they become, you could say, an established dynasty of not just scholarship, but really communal leadership. They represent the Jewish community to the Roman authorities, and they pass down the mantle of leadership, father to son, from generation to generation to generation. So you might say that this is like a rabbinic dynasty that becomes the seat of institutionalized leadership and authority. That's a new thing that just kind of arrives on the scene. And it turns out the Gemara, the Talmud, the Mishnah, and the Gemara have a number of stories, it will turn out, in which Rabban Gamliel II in particular attempts to use his position of authority to impose order in certain halachic controversies. And we're told that at some point he was so overbearing in his attempt to impose his authority over others that he lost his job as the head of the Beit Din, though he was later reinstated. Okay, so these are kind of the famous stories of Rabban Gamliel pushing it too far and imposing on everybody else. Okay, but notice again, Pirkei Avot lays out the entire dynasty, all of its members in a row. It lays them out as a group because they are a group. It's a hereditary rabbinic dynasty. And that is one part of the story of Pirkei Avot. It's one part of the story of how you could say we've tried to maintain and pass along the tradition, generation to generation, through changing circumstances when there is a certain amount of machloket. Okay, the House of Hillel, you could say this line is one potential solution to the problem. Hereditary dynasty of rabbinic leaders, where you might say institutional authority, an attempt to impose some measure of order and consistency as a counterweight to the tendency that we've seen so far, which is a tendency towards variety and dispute, even within the Masorah. Okay, that's one potential solution. But we'll see that over time, this potential solution of dynasty or of institutionalization eventually runs out of steam. It only lasts for so many generations. And so what the Mishnah then goes on to do in Avot is it gives us a second way, a second approach of how our tradition dealt with this, with the struggle to pass on the tradition, despite the fact that there is machloket with it. Okay, and so this is the next set of Mishnah within Pirkei. Okay, so here's a new solution. This is we are introduced to someone new. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai Kibel Mehilal Umishama. This is actually what we were expecting to see before we had that whole kind of insertion of the line of Gamliel and Shimon and Gamliel, etc. Okay, here we have Rabban Yochanan. Now we have a second person who gets this great title. So we have Rabban Gamliel, our rabbi, our teacher Gamliel. And now we have a second Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. He receives from Hillel and Shammai, and it turns out that he goes an entirely different direction. He does not pass on the mantle of leadership from father to son, generation to generation. Rather, what he does is he has 5 star students. Okay, it says, Chamishat Talmidim Hayu Lo Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. He had 5 students, and it names them. Eliezer ben Hortonus, Rabbi Shiur ben Hanania, Rabbi Yossi Kohen, Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach. Okay, we named these 5 kind of star students, and then it says, Hu hayam moneh shpachan, and he would name their each and praise each of their attributes, each of their outstanding virtues. So this is very interesting that Rabban Yochanan had 5 students who were different, one from the other, and Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai would praise the different virtues of each one. So, for example, Rabbi Eliezer is praised for his retention of everything that he learned. He never forgot a thing. Rabbi Elazar is praised for his creativity. Okay, Rabbi Yossi is praised for his exceptional piety, etc. 5 brilliant students who are all different from one another, and they in turn will have themselves brilliant students in the next generations who are also different from one another. So the Mishnah, as Masechet Brachot continues onward, introduces us to the stars of all these generations that are to come, each one with their own kind of one-off statement, a statement or two, that gives you a sense of what that rabbi is about and where he's coming from, because, and a little bit of the punchline, because each one is different, and each one is celebrated for their difference. So, and perhaps the greatest rabbi who will come in the upcoming generations is going to be Rabbi Akiva, a rabbi so creative that there's, of course, a story in the Gemara that will tell of an amazing story of Moshe Rabbeinu himself sitting in the classroom of Rabbi Akiva, and Moshe Rabbeinu himself struggling to follow the halachic discussion that Rabbi Akiva is teaching. Right? This is kind of gives you a sense in that story what you have to kind of drill down into what exactly that means. But Moshe Rabbeinu himself struggling to understand the Torah that Rabbi Akiva is teaching gives a sense of the level of creativity and flowering of the Torah that is to come in the generations. Okay, and that is the bulk of what follows in Pirkei Avot. From here on in is going to be the legacy of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai and the academy that he founded after the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash. Okay, and this is a little bit of a punchline. We'll see that the authority of the academy, the authority of the Beit Midrash, is very different than the authority of the institutionalized house of Hillel. The authority in the Beit Midrash is derived from the quality of your learning, your wisdom, and of your ability to argue and support your position. Very different from the kind of authority of institutionalized authority of the Gamliels and the Shimons and the like. Okay, the authority of the Beit Midrash is a kind of authority, but it's a softer, more flexible, you might say, kind of authority, maybe more durable. And that I think is a little bit of what this next section is about. Somehow, this academy that celebrates the different perspectives and strengths of its different scholars doesn't break down into factionalism in the way of the previous generations. When the members of this academy disagree, it seems they keep talking to each other. And to give you a sense of how much variety the line of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai will include, Masechet Avot, even amazingly, in the 4th chapter, includes a line from Elisha ben Abuya, who is referred to as Acher, right? The apostate, the famous apostate rabbi of the Talmud. In some way, even he is one of the fathers, even he is one of the named Avot of the tradition. Of course, it's kind of the end, but even he is named. What we find throughout the chapters of Pirkei Avot that follow is, again, this flowering of scholarship and creativity and wisdom with so many voices. And what we have is a tradition with many, many fathers. With many, that is Masechet Avot. It is a tradition that goes all the way back to Sinai, okay? But on the other hand, right, so at its core, Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai. That is the first line of Pirkei Avot. But as we go on in its detail, what we find is that the Masorah keeps growing and has many fathers. Okay. Stop. So elsewhere in the Talmud, we will see that, on the one hand, this institutionalized dynastic authority typified by Rabban Gamliel, on the one hand, and on the other hand, the softer authority of scholarship, inquiry, and argumentation, typified by the students of the Academy of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. These two camps will ultimately wind up in tension with each other. Okay, the Gemara makes this point most sharply in those series of stories that I alluded to before about the controversies and disputes between Rabban Gamliel, representing the voice of more formal authority, versus Rabbi Yehoshua, one of the star students that we saw before of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. They will come into conflict. And the story is Rabban Gamliel forces Rabbi Yehoshua to submit to his authority, regardless of whether or not Rabbi Yehoshua's position is stronger or not. Okay? Rabban Gamliel puts his foot down either way. And he even calls Rabbi Yehoshua in that story. He says, "My teacher in wisdom." That's a story in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, right? Rabban Gamliel demands that Yehoshua submit to his authority, even if Rabbi Yehoshua is, so to speak, his teacher in wisdom. Okay? And in another story, Rabban Gamliel goes even further. He goes on to embarrass Rabbi Yehoshua in order to show his, again, the dominance of the authority of Rabban Gamliel. Okay? Now, again, as the story goes, Rabban Gamliel takes it so far that the rabbis ultimately push back and he is opposed. But this controversy represents something bigger. Okay? There's always going to be this inherent tension between, one, the desire to impose structure and order on the halacha by dictate if necessary, right, in this kind of centralized, authoritative way, versus the very Jewish tendency to continue arguing, probing, exploring, wherever that may take us, okay? That's the way of the study hall, of the Beit Midrash. And so it's bound to come into conflict with a more institutionalized type of authority, okay? So, on the one hand, okay, we're going to see that, as we've seen, a variety of opinions are bound to emerge. That's just a feature of the system, okay? Even if at its core, everything is Torah Sinai, even if it all goes back to that, even so, it is a feature of the system that there is going to be a certain amount of machloket built in to the Masorah as it's passed down. We saw that in the story, in the pairs and the Zugot, that even the greatest scholars of their day, as they passed the Masorah down, may disagree. And then we also saw that this divergence of views has to be handled appropriately so that we don't divide ourselves up into splinter groups and factions, because that's what we saw happen in the period of Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai when things just went too far in that direction. So you have to, there's really kind of like this balance. On the one hand, you have to accommodate the need for variety and that emerges through the passing of the tradition and by the variety of the avot that you know, kind of the fathers of the tradition as they pass it down. So you need to accommodate that, but on the other hand, you have to have this need for continuity, and that in a story kind of way, right? Without kind of like spelling it out, but in a story kind of way, that is what the beginning of Masechet Avot is laying out for us. That on the one hand, the Masorah is this pristine thing received, right? Moshe Kivel Torah Misinai, and in some sense, it's our job to keep pruning away the things that are not part of that tradition, right? That miss the mark. But also, the Masorah is a broader and messier thing that flowers over time, that includes machloket, even among the greatest of rabbis, the greatest of scholars. Okay. So and that a little bit, again, in this kind of telling the story kind of way, what happens is that the dynasty of Hillel, the dynasty of the Gamliels, etc., does peter out after a good run, but it does peter out, and it turns out that the messier system of authority through argumentation and consensus, the path of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, is what persists, right? That is what continues. And so Pirkei Avot, in its own kind of subtle way, essentially lays out the story of how we got from Sinai to the Mishnah. You could almost miss that story if you went through Pirkei Avot, because usually when we learn things, we learn them in detail, right? We go through each of the sayings, because each of these kind of aphorisms, these, you know, kind of ethical maxims, they're each so good that they grab our whole attention when we look at them. But when you take a step back, I think what you see is the Masechet Avot is doing more than teaching us ethics. It's also giving us this very important background material so that we can understand what the Mishnah is and why it's written in a certain way. Why the Mishnah is not just a set of rules, right? It's not just a rule book. It's not a halachic rule book that was kind of handed down by Moshe and then just kind of handed down as a rule book to us, but rather it's more of a discussion about halacha that features many personalities, many opinions, again, many fathers. And it's worth noting that of the whole Mishnah, there's only one other Masechet in the Mishnah that also has this very strange aspect to it, that it is not a Masechet that revolves around halacha. There are only two, right? There are 63 tractates in the Mishnah. 61 of them focus on specific areas of halacha. Two are different. One is Masechet Avot, and the other is Masechet Eduyot. Okay, we're not going to learn that in all of its detail, but it is relevant for what we're talking about here, because if you look at Masechet Eduyot as well, what you'll find is that it too focuses on a very similar set of issues that we've just been discussing in Masechet Avot. Okay, Eduyot deals also in a very subtle way with this hard question of how we handle the fact that the Masorah, the tradition, includes variety, that it includes machloket. Our tradition may ultimately derive from Torah Misinai, but as we have it, the Torah Shebaal Peh, right, the oral law, and really the tradition as a whole, has been passed down and has many fathers. Okay, so these two Masechtot, you could say, which stand out from the others, give us a special insight into what the rest of the project of the Mishnah is about. Okay, so we're not going to go through Eduyot from, you know, kind of the way that we did with the beginning of Avot, but you could do that. If you could go through the whole of Masechet Eduyot in this kind of step back kind of way, and what you'll notice is that again, it's dealing with these kind of meta halachic issues that stand behind what's going on in the rest of the Mishnah. Okay, interesting. Okay, so let's just go. We're going to go through one piece from Eduyot, because I think it will give you a sense of what I mean by that. So let's share once again. Let's go through just a few things from Eduyot that, again, are so consistent with this question of how can you have a tradition on the one hand that goes all the way back, but on the other hand has machloket within it. Okay, So the Mishnah Eduyot starts in the first chapter with a series of very detailed debates between Hillel and Shammai. Okay, and it goes in the last one of that line of debates between Hillel and Shammai. Interesting. Hillel and Shammai are in the minority, and the opinion of the Chachamim is in the majority. So the first ones are Hillel versus Shammai, but the last ones are actually about Hillel and Shammai versus the Chachamim, the majority. Okay, and at that point, it actually is the second chapter. Again, this later, not the second chapter. It says in the fourth Mishnah. It says the Mishnah kind of anonymously asks this question: "Lama maskirin et divrei Shammai v'Hillel v'Vatala?" Why do they bother recording the opinions of Hillel and Shammai in those most recent halachot or mishnayot where Hillel and Shammai were in the minority? Why bother to tell us what their opinion was, since they were in the minority, and therefore we don't follow them? And the Mishnah asks that question, and it answers, and it says it's to teach you so that even great rabbis like Hillel and Shammai could change their mind, and they didn't necessarily hold on to their minority opinions when they were overruled. Okay, interesting. And then the next Mishnah, amazing. The Mishnah asks kind of the same question again. It says, "V'lama maskirin divrei hayachid bein hamerubim." It says, okay, not just about Hillel and Shammai, but more broadly, in general, why record the opinion of a single person among the many, when the halacha must be according to the many? Basically the same question asked again. Why bother with these minority opinions? Okay, which the Mishnah seems to record. To which the Mishnah answers, it says that it may come to be that later on a later court will prefer the opinion of the single minority opinion and depend on in the future. Okay, basically it's saying that in some future date the minority opinion may turn out to be something that the majority relies upon, that we rely upon. That's it. Majority relies. But anyways, it will be valuable in the future for its own sake. Okay, and then amazingly, the very next Mishnah asks the same question again. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, "In can, if so, lama maskirin divrei hayachid ben hamerubim?" Why do we record the singular opinions of an individual relative to the many, the vatala, which is a waste? But he gives an entirely different answer. He says, "She'im yomar ha'adam kachani mekubal." So if somebody says, this is what I have received, my minority opinion. If he says, okay, yes, I'm in the minority, but I received it, yomar lo divrei ish ploni shamatas. No, your tradition is incorrect. You received your tradition from an opinion that has already been invalidated. Okay, so basically, what we have in Masechet Eduyot in this section is the same question, more or less, asked 3 times. Why bother to record? This is the question. Why bother to record the minority opinion? And we get 3 totally different answers. The first was to show that even great rabbis were sometimes in the minority, and therefore they changed their views to fall in line with the majority. Second answer, so that the minority is available to us in a different time and place when it may be relied upon by a later court against what had previously been the majority. Okay, so according to this view, we keep the minority views around because perhaps there was something worthy in them worth saving, even if they don't carry the day today. Maybe someday things will change, and that view will wind up being what we rely on. Okay, according to this view, we don't give up our minority opinions because someday they may be valuable in practice. Okay, and then we had third, Rabbi Yehuda's view, which is the harshest. He says that we record the minority opinions so that we're aware if someone later should ever voice a similar opinion, that this view has already been rejected and should be therefore dismissed. Okay, that opinion, we will tell that person, has already been determined not to be authoritative. So don't let it trip you up. Okay, that's the third. And a funny aside, a funny twist is that Rabbi Yehuda, who is the voice of this third opinion, basically saying minority opinions are not worth keeping, right? Or are worth keeping just for their own rejection. The amazing thing is that Rabbi Yehuda is the one who says this. In some sense, Rabbi Yehuda is the great minority. He is the great dissenter of the Mishnah. Over and over and over in the Mishnah, we find Rabbi Yehuda in the minority as the singular opinion. So ironically, it is Rabbi Yehuda's own position that minority opinions are there only to be rejected. But he himself tends very often to be in the minority. So that's a little bit of a weird thing. He says you reject the minority opinion, though he himself is a minority opinion. So should we reject it? It's like a little bit of a paradox. Okay. Anyways, the Mishnah, it seems, finds this question about how to think about minority opinions so interesting that it asks the question 3 times and gives you 3 different answers. Okay. And so here's the thing. We were talking about Pirkei Avot and all of the issues that we went through so far, the way the tradition works, and kind of how we got from Sinai to the Mishnah. Okay, we talked a little bit about Eduyot and this related question of how do we deal with the fact that there is a received tradition and yet there is machlok. Okay, now you could learn all of Shas and never really worry about some of these, kind of meta halachic issues. Again, the Mishnah starts midstream in its conversation without any introduction. So you certainly don't need it to start the first chapter of Brachot. Okay, you don't have to have read Pirkei Avot to start the beginning of Brachot. But I will say that I hope you'll agree that once you've seen what Pirkei Avot does to try to give the context for what the rest of the Mishnah is, when you then go back to the beginning, I think you see it in a little bit of a different light, because what you'll find is that all of these things that we talked about in Pirkei Avot as the so-called introduction will be meaningful when you return once again to the beginning. So this is how I'm going to end. Let's go through the first Mishnah and Brachot, and we'll see actually all these same issues are there just the same. Okay. Beginning of Masechet Brachot. Me'ematai Korean and Shema B'Arvit. When can you start saying Shema in Marv? Ishasha Kohanim Nichnasim Le'achol B'Trumatan Ad Sof HaShmora V'Shema. So you can start at the time that Kohanim were allowed to start eating Truma, and by the end of the first watch, according to Rabbi Eliezer. The Chachamim are Rimah Chatzot. The rabbis, the majority, say no till midnight. Rabban Gamliel Omer Ad She'aleh Amud HaShachar. Rabban Gamliel comes in and he says, no, I disagree. I too disagree with the majority. I don't agree with Rabbi Eliezer, but I too disagree with the majority that I think you can actually say it all night. Not until midnight, but all night. Okay? So we have Rabbi Eliezer, the minority opinion, the Chachamim, the majority opinion, and Rabban Gamliel. He comes in and says, regardless of what the majority opinion is, I authoritatively say that it's actually different than that. And then it goes on. The Mishnah goes on to say, Maaseh, there's a certain case. Sheba'u vanav mibeit hamishter. The children of Rabban Gamliel came from a certain banquet house. Lo, it said to him, look, Harinu at Shema. So we haven't said Kriyat Shema yet, and it's already late into the night. We're just coming back from our feasting. Okay, Amar Lahem, Rabban Gamliel said to them, Lo aladim with shachar. If it's not daybreak yet, Hayavim we have to say Shema. Now you might say, wait a second, that the majority opinion told them that it's too late, that in past midnight, and they shouldn't be able to do it. Nevertheless, Rabban Gamliel comes over the top and says, no, we kind of follow my opinion. Now the Mishnah then goes on to say, V'lozav Bilvad, and not only that, Elakol Kol ma she'amru chachamim ad chatzot mitzvatan ad she'ya'aleh min hashachar. Rabban Gamliel goes on to say that actually the chachamim agree with me, that even though they said that you have to finish Kriyat Shema by midnight, they actually agree with me that you can do it all night. And the only reason that they said you must stop at midnight is kedei la'archik et ha'adam min ha'avera. They were just giving you a cut. What they didn't mean what they said. They said you must finish by midnight, but they didn't really mean that that was like absolutely you must finish by midnight. Actually, they were just kind of giving you they were telling you to finish by midnight in order that you shouldn't trip up and really be too late by not finishing it that night as a whole. Okay, so okay, let's just reflect on this. What is this about? Kind of going back to the first mission. Okay, we have all the in this first mission, we have all the elements that we saw before. Okay, we have Rabbi Eliezer, one of the great 5 star students of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, and he makes his argument. But it turns out that he is in the minority. And so we have the question of the minority and the majority. Why keep the minority, even when there's a majority? And then we had the question of authority, which is, can Rabban Gamliel basically come in over the top and say that regardless of what the majority opinion says, really his view is what governs, and that really everybody, kind of agrees with him or ought to fall in line. Okay, the first mission on Brachot lays all of this out in this matter-of-fact way. And at the end of it, you might ask yourself, what is the conclusion? Okay, we have 3 opinions. What now? Okay, why doesn't the Mishnah just tell us what is the answer? Right? But that is not the way that the Mishnah is written. And perhaps Masechet Avot helps us with the background to understand why it's written in this very unusual way. Because who are these people? Where are they coming from? What stands behind the debate in the first place? Is there something bigger going on? Hey, why is the Mishnah written this way? So hopefully this comes together a little bit. I'm just going to recap because we've covered a lot of ground. Basically, Masechet Avot lays out the context within which the Mishnah emerges. It starts with a history of where the tradition comes from, right? Basically, again, how did we get from Sinai to the Mishnah? Masechet Avot tells us about the tradition's source, but also something about its development. In one sense, Moshe Kibel Torah Sinai, and in another sense, the Masorah, the passing down of that tradition, that ancient tradition, is a tradition with many fathers. And Masechet Avot sketches out for us a little bit of a way of how to think about this. And we saw the Mishnah is grappling over and over with the same question. How do we think about passing down a tradition that includes variation and dispute? Torah Sinai, how do we understand that the Masorah passed down to us has many fathers and many disparate opinions? We saw that the Mishnah in Eduyot builds on this question as well, asking over and over, what are we to do with this variety of opinions? Is it fundamentally a glitch of the system, an error that needs to be rooted out? Okay, does being in the minority mean that you ought to change your view, or even stronger, that we only keep your opinion around in order to remember that it's already been wrong and therefore rejected? Or, on the other hand, is a variety of opinions a natural feature of halachic debate, of the authority of the academy, in which you derive your authority and your strength from the power of your argumentation and kind of the worthiness of your view, which sometimes turns out to be the majority opinion, though sometimes it is not. Sometimes it remains the minority, at least for a time, okay? So all of this hopefully gives us a better sense of what the project of the Mishnah is. Not a halachic rule book, right? But rather, you could say a snapshot of a moment in a much longer conversation that involves all these generations, and all these fathers who came before us, even before the writing of the Mishnah. And the Mishnah is written in this way that balances the fact that it wants to preserve what came before, while also kind of inviting the reader to kind of step in and continue that conversation. And hopefully we've seen tonight that Pirkei Avot gives us this introduction to let us know a little bit about where in the flow of that conversation we are stepping in. Thank you, everyone. this was longer than usual. I really love Pirkei Avot, so I couldn't hold back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Josh.
So why doesn't it start with that, with the Pirkei Avot, to lay down what we're supposed to expect?
This is a great question. I mean, I'll just give you a thought. I think over and over, the like leave aside the mission, even start with the Torah. The Torah is full of stories that we're supposed to learn all these lessons from. And yet, the Torah never says, here are 20 lessons that you ought to take away from the Torah, right? Right? There's no place, like you can learn all the stories of the flood, you know, and the Dabavel, and the whole history of the beginning of our people, right? And you're supposed to learn all these things from it, but it never tells you, here are the lessons. And it seems that the exercise of just kind of starting and going through it and figuring it out is a much deeper way to come to understand things than someone telling you this is the answer. And so you might think that the Mishnah does something similar. The Mishnah doesn't like kind of tell you here's all of the basics and here are all the things that you need to know before you get started. It just throws you into the pool. And by doing it, you come to learn a lot about how it works. And then I think you know, it's kind of like if you missed it, you know, Avot gives you a little extra material to help you figure out what's going on. But even then, it's not like your Avot lays out. I mean, that took an hour, and hopefully you were even convinced, you know. But it took an hour just to even kind of unpack. So our whole tradition is constantly forcing us to figure things out for ourselves, which hopefully makes it set deeper in ourselves, and kind of make it ours, as opposed to someone just telling you and you might remember or you might forget.
Thank you, Josh.
Yeah, again, thanks everyone. I'm gonna sign off. But it was great seeing everyone. Good night.